Welcome everybody. As you see, it's not quarter past, it's 10 past. It's the new KTH Athena rule. No, not really. But I knew there were some of you coming in later, so we waited. So welcome again back to the 8th installment of the Athena Distinguished Guest Scholars Lecture Series. And if you haven't been here, this is a series that was established within the Center for the Future of Places, which I'm directing. My name is Tigran Haas. And it's a unique one for many reasons, but not least for the reason that all the 20 scholars and guests are females, and very distinguished scholars, if I may say. So today we have a special one because here we have now a friend of our center, a person that's been involved within our work in the last year and a half. It's Professor Setha, and I'll make just a short introduction. And I usually make this poster. Sometimes our guest speakers find pictures that they were like, wow, where did you find that? And who has put that on the net? But of course, the World Wide Web is a full and open society, so you can just take anything you like. But as you can see, Professor Setha from the Graduate City at the City University of New York. She's the former president of the American Anthropological Association and a professor of environmental psychology, and as well as the director of the Public Space Research Group in the City University of New York. And for some of you that know, then of course that's why there's such a close correlation between the Center for the Future of Places, because public space is in the core of our activities. Setha has PhD in cultural anthropology from University of Berkeley, probably at that time when Berkeley was top of the pops, when they had this sort of real focus on interdisciplinary research. She trains students in anthropology of space and place, urban anthropology, anthropology of the body, cultural values, and historic preservation. There's so many publications and so many presentations one could go through, but of course, it's always a subjective judgment when you choose the certain books. But I would say probably the latest one is Spatializing Culture, and I really recommend that warmly to you. And of course, there's the classics that we use in teaching and that we use in research, the politics of public space, the Rethinking Urban Parks, Behind the Gates, and a number of great anthologies, and this is one of them, The People, Place, and Space Reader. I think it's by Routledge that I recommend. So your current research is probably on the private governance of New York City and co-ops and condominiums, and now you're writing a new book, which is almost a research project called Spatializing. Oh, sorry, that's the one, of course. That's the old, yeah, that's the old, yeah. But there's another one that you're working now on public spaces. The collaborative project you did with Dolores Hayden, that started in 2009? I don't know if that's completed. It's got done, yeah. And then you became a co-chair of the Public Space and Diversity Network in 2011. And I know last night I discovered this amazing discussion one-on-one, you and David Harvey at CUNY, about public space, 45 minutes and 56 seconds. So I'll send you guys a link. It's just great. And there's no picture. There's just this blue poster, and then it's your two voices. But it's so good and so natural. So it's one of the best stuff I've heard on public space. So I think the 4 books you can have in mind: The Spatializing Culture, I'm Going Back in Time, Rethinking Urban Parks. That's a really interesting one. Behind the Gates, and finally the old one, which is a classic in the field, On the Plaza, on the public space. So without any further ado, it's a really exciting talk we have today from you, which is called Why Public Space Matters. Setha.
Hi, everyone. Okay, I don't know if we have the time. This is, first of all, I'm so glad to be here, and I'm really glad to see all of you here. This is a talk, actually is dedicated to Tigran. It is my first attempt at putting together a book that I've promised him and that I hope will be something that we can all enjoy. But it's a book for the public. And so I wrote this lecture in a way as a kind of public lecture. And it's my first foray into what I call the positive side of public space. Most of you are used to me talking about, or if those of you who've heard me before, I talk a lot about threats and problems, and I will mention that, I promise. But in order for us to take public space to the streets, so to speak, I think we have to be very clear and incredibly articulate about why it's important. And this is just a start. It's missing all kinds of pieces still, and that's what will be fun if we have time to discuss, is what else can we put in and where? Because what, of course, is the interesting problem is how to organize and make sense of and put into categories and ways of thinking about all the incredible numbers of ways that public space matters. One of my friends who writes popular books in the United States said, Why Public Space Matters won't work as a title. So she's given the book a new title, and it's called What is Public Space, since a lot of people don't know, and Why Should I Care, which is a kind of American, I think a more American take on this. Why should I care at all? And then I would add to it, and what are we going to do about it? I think that that's really the final piece of it. The other thing that I think that's enough to get started. So, Public Space Matters. This is Kerala, India, and this is a small city, small town that I was in, and this is the middle of a festival which was taking place in their public space. And I just wanted to write you a list of all the ways that I could think that public space matters at an individual and community level. And then to remind you that public space matters at many scales, because, and this is my Parque Central, in which I wrote the book on the plaza, it also matters at a societal and global level. And one of the things that I think is really hard for us is to realize the multiple scales that public space is acting on, and how do we be articulate that at one level, I would say the societal and global is of greatest importance to me, but without the individual and the community, really, we don't have much to say, and we certainly can't do our research at that scale. So I'm going to do something a little provocative, I hope, at least for some in the audience, is I'm going to argue for this talk that I have an ideal, and I'm now calling it, for my mentor, public space for all. Not city for all, but now public space for all. And I'm going to, for today and for our conversation, define public space in the way that it provides an opportunity for social interaction, especially among people not normally encountered. The other way of saying that is Richard Sennett's idea of social interaction among strangers. That's another term. But they needn't be strangers. It's just the idea that public space is the one place in a society, in a nation, even in the globe, where people can come together and see people they wouldn't normally see, and possibly interact with and encounter in new ways. And what this does is it highlights the value of human connections, which is what I am really trying to say, and the importance of protecting space for spontaneous, unmediated interactions, things that can just occur. And finally, in a kind of sense of Dewey, for problem solving. So people come together to solve problems. They do it in spontaneous ways, in non-programmed ways. And it imagines, and this I'm sort of saying to my colleague Michael out there, Michael, this is a lot less about planning and design. What I'm first in this talk trying to examine is how important the human connection part is of public space. And then I promise to come back next year and I'll give you another talk which will get into more of the physical fabric. But this is where, as an anthropologist, I want to start. And as many of you know, I'm really committed to social justice, so this is where I can find justice embedded. One thing I want to remind us is there's a 12,000-year history. Actually, we just pushed it back, I think 13,000-year history of public space. And it's been used for social interaction among strangers, for commerce, for values, ideals, for military displays, for governance. And Jeffrey Fleischer, who has written quite a bit about the history of public space, and that I think we'll be writing a new book together on a kind of deep history of public space, is that it is always tied to the earliest forms of sociality. Not just settlement patterns, which you may be familiar with, but always in terms of sociality. And so, our familiar agora. Now, it's true it was men, and not only was it men, it was propertied men, but it was men who were free and who could meet each other and would not necessarily meet each other. Or we have, this is from Puerto Rico, where I just was a week ago, and this is a Taíno, that's the indigenous people of Puerto Rico, their ceremonial plaza, which is pre-1500. And it was the place where everyone in the community came, and where they, people from outside the community would come in and would meet. This is Songo Nara. This is, again, a Jeffrey Fleischer site from Tanzania. Again, pre-1500, prehistory in that sense. And you can see the open area where there's a mosque, a cemetery, and houses all around. Again, a center for sociality. And this is my work, Tenochtitlan. This is a map that was drawn by Cortez in 1524 and sent to King Philip in Spain, Philip II. And as you can see in the center, there is a public space. And if you want any proof that public spaces was always a place where you would meet people you wouldn't normally encounter, Cortez meets Montezuma and all of the Aztecs. He also meets the people who sided with him against the king, and everything happened in that central space as early as 1524, and we have letters that document it. And here's that same space. This is Tenochtitlan today. It's Mexico City, and here is a protest for indigenous rights. So this very important public space that was there from about 1300, we think, but documented in 1524, is still with us today and still functioning as a place of social interaction and encounter. So in a concept as complicated as public space, I think for a moment let's take the two parts, take it apart. So public first, what do we mean by public or publics? You have to sort of think, what do you mean? Can a public exist in the private sector? Does public mean governmental, or, as Dewey or Habermas argue, is the public form as a corrective to the power of the state and to the sort of individual personal profit motive of the individual? And this, thanks to my colleague Michael, is the public a kind of commons? Is it a place outside of those structures? And space, what do we mean by space? Everyone, are we including physical, virtual, imaginary space in our discussion? And just to give you some idea of where this might take us, here's the mall is public space in Tehran. In Tehran, women, in often gender-segregated societies, Pakistan and Iran being two good examples that we have a lot of data on, women feel most comfortable in malls and in privatized spaces. So here's a place, suddenly public really is in a private space, where in the United States, I can tell you very honestly that the mall really isn't public and not in the ways that we're talking about. And yet, in this cultural setting, where women do not feel safe outside on the streets or are harassed either by the police or by men, this becomes a place where they can be. Virtual space. Here's an example of I am arguing now against just thinking about public space as physical, but here's an example of a young man who is using with this virtual reality glasses, and he can see the country that his colleagues who are from Somalia, actually this is in Maine, it says Portland, Maine up here. He can see the homeland of the men he's friends with in this public space. So virtual space can provide a new kind of spectrum of understanding that we didn't have before. Now, so as to not sound too Pollyannish, and because this is really what I'm known for studying, there are lots of constraints to social interaction in public space. And I am not, as I said, going to spend my time on these, but just take a look and you will see that the structure of ownership and property relations, such as any form of privatizations, privately owned public spaces, business improvement districts, planning and design, certain kinds of aesthetics, what kinds of furniture you put on it, laws, government policies, rules and regulations, fear of others, securitization, policing, surveillance, barriers and things, and profit-driven rather than social justice policies such as commodification, commercialization, and corporatization, which you also see here in Sweden today. These are all constraints. And here's a nice example. This is Baltimore's Harbor Place. It was designed by Rouse. I don't know if you'd be familiar, but he designs many kinds of market halls, very popular in the United States, actually all over the world at this point. And I'm walking down a skywalk, and a little girl is there, a little black girl, and she says, "Am I allowed to go there?" And I was really surprised, and I said, "Well, yeah, of course." And she replied that she didn't think she could enter because she had no money. But this slide is just to remind you how really subtle the aesthetics, the privatization, how complicated these constraints are. And to keep that in mind as we talk about the more important part of my message today, which is even with these constraints, contemporary public space is socially, culturally, economically, and politically productive. And I guess that's what I want you to walk away with today, this idea of the productivity of public space. I think that is the central idea that I'm trying to communicate, and that in order for us to really make a difference in the world, we need to communicate this productivity in a lot of different ways. It is a major, maybe the major, but certainly a major contributor to a flourishing society, and a flourishing society is what we're all trying to achieve. So I am now going to talk about 4 areas. These are just general typologies of how public space contributes to a flourishing society. And each of these will be elaborated into 5 areas. As you can see, I will start with social justice and democratic practices, which will include these 5 areas. I will then turn to health and community well-being. I think I go to play and recreation, and I will end with social, cultural, and economic relations. An interesting thing about this graphic is if you look at the last piece, oh, I'm not supposed to move. I'm not supposed to move. If you look on the fifth line down on each, you'll see that some of the categories seem to me more important, something to take away, stronger than the others. So under play, the issue of creativity, artistic creativity. Under social justice, the ability to contest and protest. Under well-being, the concept of resilience. And under social, cultural, and economic relations, my colleague thinks sustainability is the most important here, and maybe it is, but for me, collective memory, that we have collective memory. So that the order of these does tell you something about, I think, the degree of importance. So let's start. Social inclusion and belonging. So the first study I'm going to talk about, these are all based on Are you with me? Is everyone, am I clear? You can hear me? Yeah, very quiet. And let's start with Jones Beach, which is the largest of the public spaces that I'll be looking at, and I will try to cover spaces of all sizes and dimensions. It was originally planned and designed by Robert Moses in the mid-1920s. It has huge beaches. It was designed for the middle class with very elaborate bathhouses, grassy areas, picnic tables. It has swimming pools. It is an incredible place. It is on Long Island. Here, you'll see in a minute. Again, I don't know, I'm here in Sweden, but New York City, this is Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx, and here is Nassau County. Jones Beach is here on Long Island, and yet as you can see that it draws people from all over New York City as well as far as Connecticut. And this is a great place for the production of social inclusion and belonging. "This is America," said the man from the Bronx. "At Jones Beach, there is a friendly crowd. People are out with family and friends. It's a diverse place, and I feel welcome here." And another woman says, "The first time I visited this park with my wife," said a man originally from El Salvador. "I finally felt like I belonged in this country. We played in the ocean with hundreds of other folks. Somehow this made me feel special." Representation. Again, I want to point out to the map that you can begin to see that almost 50% of the visitors to Jones Beach State Park come from New York City. And that diverse group of people that are coming who are experiencing inclusion and belonging also see themselves there. And that sense of representation changes their sense of belonging and citizenship and pride. As one resident says, I depend on the park. Another, without Jones Beach, I wouldn't live in New York City. A visitor from Long Island City said it would make a difference if the park were private. We wouldn't come if it was private. Public is supposed to mean open to all, without exception to race and culture. And in the world I'm living in the United States right now, representation and a sense that you are a citizen and part of a nation is an incredibly important part, as it is here in Sweden, and public space really contributes to that. It doesn't just contribute to that, it even goes farther. It can contribute to a recognition of difference. Not only are we all represented, and not only are we feeling that we belong to a society, but that we recognize not everybody's the same. And he said, everyone should have a chance to access this beach. There are a lot of families here. It's pretty lively. Everyone gets along. That's what New Yorkers are, tolerant. And then another group of Southeastern Asian Indian men from Valley Stream. Valley Stream is a suburb. Concur, and one says, there are more brown people playing ball and hanging out. It's getting more animated. People do not look at you just because of your color. And there's a sense of recognition of difference and tolerance. And finally, is the ethic of care. And here is a slide actually of volunteers working on the boardwalk, which continually is worked on. And one says, when you're walking in the park, you feel you're walking in something great. Said a park goer describing why they care about the site. And what I then go on to talk about, and this will be part of this book that I'm writing, how many people come together to try to repair this park. Volunteers, friends of the park, local workers, and they're restoring the boardwalk, the West Bathhouse, the pool, and collectively they produce an environment in which people both care for the environment and care for each other. Now, one thing that doesn't happen that often at Jones Beach, and that I said to you before that I think is really a very critical part of social justice and democratic practice for all of us, is that there can be protest and demonstration. The terms I've used is contestation and resistance. And where that usually happens is often on the streets. Do you agree? Even here. I've been here on May 1st when the streets are pretty well full of people and demonstrators. This is San Francisco, however. In California. This is research done by a graduate student of mine, Manissa Maharwal. And here this is her slide, is showing you that what is happening in San Francisco is the streets are getting taken over by, well, it's a little more complicated. Let me step back. What's going on in San Francisco is about an hour south is where Apple and all the big tech companies are, all right? Just south. And those companies are pulling in huge numbers of fairly wealthy, often white, young tech workers. And they want to appeal to these young people because they want the very best to come and work for them. And they don't want to necessarily go live in San Jose or in, down by Palo Alto because it's suburbs. They want to live in a city. San Francisco is a city. And so what has started happening is Google and all of the different companies have started encourage their new employees that they can live in San Francisco and they are going to take buses. They have what we call Google buses, if you read the news. Have any of you ever heard about the Google bus kind of thing? All right, well, so anyhow, and you all know what Google is, right? I don't need this. Okay, just want to make sure we're all in the same cultural, be sure. Okay. So Google now runs buses, not just Google, but I'm using that as a metaphor, from the city streets of San Francisco down, and they don't pay any. I think they pay $1 a day, something like that, some ridiculous low amount of money, even though these are private buses taking employees directly to where they are. But they're having incredible amount of impact. Not only do they fill up the streets so that the public buses are, in the way. So there's just that in terms of a public street. It's changing, of course, the rent structure. It's totally rapidly gentrifying San Francisco so that large numbers of people are losing their homes, boom, rapidly. This has happened in like the last year, 2 years. And there has been, as you can see here, eviction-free San Francisco, but tenants in buildings where they rented are being evicted. All right, either for not payment or because they want to raise the rent or because they want to convert the rental into a cooperative. I heard Tigran did say that I'm also work on co-ops and condominiums. At any rate, you follow my drift. So it isn't just that they're taking the public space of the street, right? They are also taking all of the space and the housing and all the goods. Many of you have heard me give another example where they have set up systems where you have to pay to use a soccer field where Latino youth have been playing soccer forever for no money, and suddenly come in the kind of Google Tech kids and they want to sign up to play soccer or something at a certain time, and suddenly it costs $25 to use a public park. These are subtle but incredibly important. And what these slides are showing you is that the same streets of San Francisco are being used to protest, contest, and in some ways trying to resist this change. Okay, that's social justice and democracy. Community and individual well-being, huge category. And for this, I've decided to use a walkway rather than a beach. Again, I told you I want to talk about different kinds of public space. And this is, again, to my colleague, Michael, this is between Poughkeepsie and Highland, New York. I think I have a map in the next slide, but that doesn't mean much to some of you, but those of you who these are very economically deteriorated towns. They're towns in which the industries have pulled out, that there is a very low, a lot of unemployment, incredibly number of minorities who really live on welfare in many cases. These are towns that are really, really struggling for a variety of reasons that we don't have time to go into. And one of the things that I think didn't come out very clearly on this is public space actually has an impact, even on these kinds of economically deteriorating situations. Because this was an old train bridge that was wood and very dangerous, and the community got together. It's about 212 feet above the Hudson River. You have to put it in meters, and it's about 1.28 miles long. And it has revitalized these communities and has had tremendous impact on the health of its citizens, many of whom are, again, disadvantaged, low privileges, minority, but also lots of older people who were trapped in these dying towns. So physical health is the first part of walkway, and this visitor who keeps running says it motivates her to exercise on the bridge. What motivates her is the scenery of the surrounding environment. She says she picks up her pace, when she gets to the bridge because the air is cool and the wind makes her feel alive. And another said, I love looking at the boats down at the water and the houses. I love being outside like this. It's a backup plan for not going to the bridge. Sometimes it's just too nice outside and I don't want to be inside. And I should just say that the statistics on the health, particularly of seniors, which are being monitored here, has made a difference. And also in terms of mental health. It's not just physical health, but mental health. And this is a middle-aged African-American man who was having an incredible time. He'd had a stroke, and his doctor was really concerned. And he's saying that the bridge is mentally therapeutic. He goes, the bridge is my sanctuary. I love the water. I don't want to go in the water, but I love looking at it. It helps me think, make sense of my life. And so it's not just physical health that a public space can make a difference in. It is also mental health and I will return to this when we get to creativity. Safety and accessibility, I only have many examples, but the way that the bridge was designed, it now has an elevator so people with all forms of disability can use it. It's built so that you can see over the railing, but children cannot fall through the through the lats on the side. But most importantly, a woman walker emphasizes that the walkway makes her feel safe compared to the other places that she goes for exercise. She says, "Everyone here is very friendly. Luckily, everyone I come across lets me pat their dog, and they are very friendly. Some of the parks that I go to, I worry about some of the people there, but I never come across anybody who made me feel uncomfortable or unsafe on the walkway." Again, that's a really important statement. Public space, when it is designed well and when it really functions, creates a sense of safety that really is important. And not only is it safe and accessible, it also can convey this sense of security. As this woman puts it, I think it's just that there are types of people who walk here to have a peaceful experience and to free their mind of whatever is on it, especially when you're working out. I think one of the reasons I come to the walkway is because I feel secure and I can get lost in my thoughts. It's a very peaceful place. And then going down farther, one visitor says the dogs are friendly here. I pet them. One dog wanted to go with us over the walkway. This makes it a different park in that anyone can use it. Some are running, some are jogging, some are with dogs. There are a lot of different people. And it feels secure to everyone. And resilience. These were two very poor communities, as I've explained, Poughkeepsie and Highland. And this bridge was a historic bridge. And by coming together to build and get the money to do it, really completely changed what was going on in the towns. As someone says, Poughkeepsie is just a place that's been overlooked, but democracy works. The people saved their own great walkway. They honored it by saving it. And another woman said, it's kind of nice to see that all that hard work paid off. So in the coming together to create this public space, they also created a kind of social solidarity across class, across generation that had not really existed before. So that's health, moving to resilience. Play and recreation. Are we okay? We're okay? Are we all right? Very quiet. All right, so here we are at Lake Welch. Lake Welch is a constructed lake. It's about a half hour from the Bronx. That's the north part of New York City. And it was built, as you can see, in the 40s. It opened in 1962. It's very, very popular with Latinos from the northern sections of New York. It's a major destination for religious groups, believe it or not, in New York City. And here are some of the reasons why. Because this whole idea of play, this section on play and recreation, I think the most important piece of this that I want to start with is the socialization of children. And I'm beginning to lose my voice, so since you can read, I will not read quite as much. But one male, I'm moving down, says, people here are very nice. When I need a lighter for the barbecue, someone lends me one. Another observes, this place has many Latinos. We naturally gravitate towards them when we hear people speaking Spanish. It's a normal human reaction. One Jamaican man says, I see families, little children, young people playing. It's a good place. It's a happy place. Someone says that they come every Sunday. This is really the only day we can all get to see each other. And some argue that the natural environment itself is really important for their children, and that they feel that part of this is socializing their children to enjoy nature and to understand their relationship to it. So socialization of children through play and recreation is important. Team building. I don't know if I need to say much about team building. Team building is pickup soccer. There are no formal games here, but pickup soccer is one of the ways that people meet each other all over, at least where I live in the United States, not just in New York, everywhere. Pickup games are ways that we build new relations, playing together, and this is an incredibly important place for pickup soccer, where you do not have to reserve ahead of time, and that they're constantly open games and people are included. Relaxation. Of course, relaxation is part of play and really important. And here we have a middle-aged woman saying, you know, one can get the stress off by relaxing with others in this natural and highly sociable setting. Another one says, here down at the end, she said that she contrasts being in the outdoor environment at Lake Welch and their daily life in the room where they live. In New York City, in the Bronx, whole families may live in one room. I guess that's probably true here in Stockholm, immigrant families living in one room. But you can have 4 or 5 people. I mean, you talk about the past, it's still with us now. And so everybody could live all together in one room. And she says, the park gives her the chance to clear her mind, to despejarse. She said, we like the beach, the water. We live closed within a room, encerrados. She says, here we get to go out. And reflection. And for some people, this reminds them of childhood experiences, and it reminds them of playing outdoors. That's, in this case, in Mexico. Others, though, it's the memory of going with their parents to this park, because people have been doing this for generations in the city, just having the family together every Sunday and knowing it was going to happen. It was something to look forward to. Excuse me. Retreat. I mentioned religiosity. One of the things I didn't tell you about Lake Welch and why it's also so special, and I wonder if there's a park like this here in Stockholm, is families as big as 100 can get together. Latino, Black, large immigrant, Southeast Asian families do live in these tiny, tiny, tiny apartments. And on Sunday and on holidays, they come at 6 a.m. in the morning. They take as many picnic tables as they possibly can. They all collectively come together and spend the day seeing each other, back to the socialization, but also cultural identity. But the other thing that goes on here is it has always been an important religious site. And I think it's one of the things we forget about with that, the importance of public space for its for sacred events, for pilgrimage, for processions, for baptism, which is what you're seeing here in the water, and that. A retreat, a religious retreat, many of our public spaces are where people go to have what they say their religious experience. And many people here at Lake Welch says this, but again, I'm just using this an example of so many places that people would talk about as a retreat, as a way to get away, as a way to relax, but also to have a religious experience, especially in the company of others. And creativity. So I'm taking you to another country again as I switch you to Puerto Rico and taking you to countries that I work in. I work in Latin America mostly and in the United States. Public space is a place of creativity, and the street is definitely an important part of that creativity. And this is a mural, one of hundreds that you find in Salvador, Brazil, or in the streets of New York, or name your favorite city of murals. What's anybody's favorite city? Huh? Okay, Berlin. That's a good one. Yeah, Berlin has great murals. I have a graduate student right now doing research on a mural that's getting painted over and over and over, and that the Puerto Rican and Mexican population keep painting their iconography, their representations, their cultural representations, actually religious representations on a wall that is on a public street. And where little by little there is this rapprochement happening about the kind of claiming of the street through this creative act and through artistic acts. But that's not the only kind of creativity we find in public space. In fact, this is an area I really want to develop a lot more, but songs and singing and music and dance and performance, our public spaces are major sources of major places where people can come together and participate in performing art of all kinds, without which I think we would really impoverish our societies. And finally, social, cultural, and economic relations. What I mean by this category, again, I could use your help on how to talk about it better, but I'm talking about the very essence now of society. There's sort of really deep things that create social solidarity. And I don't have one good universal word. If we can find one, better categories, I'm for it. But probably these 5 areas are the most critical in terms of probably arguing, say, to a mayor of a town. Say you're a designer or a planner or an anthropologist and you want to convince somebody of doing public. I think this is really where the rubber hits the road. This is the most important part. And I'm going to give you some very different examples, but use your imagination and think more highly. Rosa, this is where your informal economy comes in, and I'm so weak on her entrepreneurs, but let me go back. Oh, thanks so much. So I'm going to cover informal economy, sustainability very briefly, but that doesn't mean I think they're any less important. The truth of the matter is I can't fit everything in barely in an hour, and I want us to talk. So let me just go through it. I'm going to talk about a town. Why does it start with? There's something wrong. I must have messed up the slides. This is in the wrong order. I don't know, Kevin, how I did it, because collective memory and should be. Anyway, I was just in, do you all know that Puerto Rico had a terrible hurricane, Maria? Okay. And this is one of the devastated towns in the highlands, which is in a coffee area. It's called Lares. And it's lost the highest, about 600,000 people have left Puerto Rico for the United States post-Maria. And of that, some people say 800,000. And we're talking about an island that maybe has 4 million. So it's a lot of people. And this is the town where the most people left, up in the highlands. They were cut off for the entire 5 months without electricity. And what I'm going to just briefly talk about is how they're using their public space to try to bring themselves back. So informal economy and sustainability, again, if I had more time, I would take these apart. But one of the things they're doing is using all these vacant yards that were created by the hurricane and growing gardens. And in that way, improving the sustainability for food. Food sovereignty is a really big issue in Puerto Rico. Again, Puerto Rico imports all its food from the United States. It used to be self-sufficient. It isn't. There's a whole it's an agroecologia movement that is going on in order that people begin to grow their own food. And where does it start? Starts in our towns on these vacant lots. The same thing is they also sell the food, which creates a whole kind of new informal economy. And there are vendors and people who grow the food and then take the food out either to other towns or into the market. So here are our public spaces now working to help the resilience of a town come back. It's also, their public spaces are places of cultural identity and collective memory, which become incredibly important during disasters. This is a monument to El Grito de Lares, which is the cry of Lares and the revolutionary flag that was created in 1847. This is a mosaic. You can see Setha at work on this one. This was just a couple weeks ago. That's me in my field clothes right there, taking pictures of this map that shows the entire island of Puerto Rico and shows how it is all hooked into Lares, giving this little town a sort of sense of center, and it's done right in their main plaza. And this is a house that is right on, again, a kind of a center of informal economy where they make hand-made ice cream that is very popular actually everywhere, and photographs that document the revolution, and where political discussions and the retelling of the story of political struggles occur. Excuse me. One more example, and then I will close. Social capital. We haven't talked much about social capital, and I think it should not be left aside, in any way. It's certainly important. These public spaces are where people come together, and also where they get to know each other and network with one another and help one another and find jobs. Again, in the Spatializing Culture book, I talk about translocal spaces like bus stations and train stations. Actually, I don't know where they are, where all kinds of people from all over the world meet each other and help each other find jobs. How much more important can a public space be than that? But here is Battery Park City at the very tip of Manhattan, over there on that side, and this is one of the public spaces that remains. But what I wanted to point out is the World Trade Center was right next to the buildings of Battery Park City, and this is a slide as seen from Gateway Plaza on September 11th, 2001, with the bombing of the South Tower. That bombing and the destruction of that part of the city created a civic process about deciding on the memorial for that's World Trade Center. In New York, we get very used to the WTC Center Memorial. And it began an entire process of community building, just trying to decide about this memorial. And the level of activism increased, the social value of their networks. These were fairly middle-class people who lived there. Actually, it's mixed. There was affordable housing, middle-class housing, and actually elite housing, all in Battery Park City. But they used all of their networks together, got a representative on the community board, created an online newspaper, had a website, a neighborhood association, and they used their social capital, essentially, to try to change the memorialization process. And the other thing that was so interesting to me when I was doing my research is newcomers. All right, about half, after the World Trade Center bombing, about half the people leave. And residents leave, because you're right there. You were smack in it. And it's dirty, it's closed, you cannot even imagine. So lots of people leave, and many do never come back. But then the old-timers began to really worry about the new people coming in. Who were they? Were they like them? Were they going to be part of the community? But this activism and coming together about the memorial really began to integrate people in a new way. This is a project I did with school kids, asking them to imagine what they would like the memorial to look like. And down there is a roller coaster. Up here is a Red Cross bridge, a cathedral. You can see their ideas. But the point was that Battery Park City residents, the people who lived in this community that had been devastated by this disaster, did not want more memorials in their public space. They wanted something that they could use. Unfortunately, as many of you may know, this is the Libeskind plan and the Michael Arad and Peter Walker design were very formal and quite very much a memorial and not much about living. And I kind of want to conclude this by saying where public space can be a site of collective memory, as in Lares in Puerto Rico, I'm not sure in Battery Park City whose public space this is, and certainly whose collective memory. So, public space contributes to a flourishing society in a lot of ways. These 20 ways that I have tried to touch on are just a beginning. One might argue some are more important than others. I don't know. I'd love to hear from you. Some might be more critical than others. In the comments I've gotten back is I haven't spent enough time on the economics of it, but it seems to me that's the next talk. First, we need to the next talk is about how to make that work, or what the plan would look like, but do we begin to agree that these are essential pieces of a flourishing society? That's the conversation I want to have, because that's what people want to know. If I go to Caracas or we go to Niger, what are these fundamental pieces of a flourishing society that everyone should have? public space for all in these ways. What do we have that's missing? One thing I already figured out is, what about safe places for homeless people to sleep? I saw 2 people on the streets today, and I thought, do I think that's good, or do I want a better place? Don Mitchell, who is now at Uppsala, was saying, there is no, with capitalism, there is no total solution to homelessness. All right, okay, all right. So I'm a public space person. That's my job. How do I accommodate homelessness in a better way in public space? How do I accommodate the Roma in public space? So I feel like somehow that didn't get in here. But under informal economy, it seems to me there's just a lot of work. Your entrepreneurs go under informal. Sustainability, Michael wrote me, he said, what about more ecological sustainability? It certainly helps a society flourish. Is public space the best and only way to do it? If so, we really need to articulate that a lot more. My examples, the best I could show you was Lares. The community gardens, I think, are really good, or greenways, or, this is just a beginning, but I want to engage you in thinking with me about what the pieces are that we want to argue for, because this is what I really do, which is I really look at all the ways that we're trying to stop it from happening. And many of you have seen this talk that I give called Threats and Opportunities. But just for those of you who have not seen this before, most of my research has been on looking at how the world I've just presented to you, that flourishing society, places of belonging, places where you can protest, places where you can play, places where you feel like you're involved, places where you can be healthy, all the kinds of things that public space can do for you can be undone just as easily through lack of representation, privatization, securitization, and social injustice. And so that's where I want to leave you, is I didn't want you to think I was a total Pollyanna. I just wanted you to think with me about why it matters, fighting for why it matters, and at the very same time think about then why we can't do a better job of providing it. Thank you so much. Did I move too much?
You were like a Swiss watch, but the old Swiss watches. You were perfect. The timing is perfect in the content. Is that what you were asking?
No, he told me I couldn't move.
Oh, you couldn't move,
and
okay.
I hate not...
Yeah, I know. You're not allowed to move. But now it's that time. Okay. Because I know this was so rich. So and this is...
Do we have time for a question
Absolutely.
or two? Okay.
We have all the time in the world.
All right.
We have until 5. So I'm...
Tell me what you think. I want to know.
And I also forgot that each of our speakers is also involved in a parallel event or something sideways, because we have a big meeting on the research we're developing in the center, a public space research database. So Setha has been involved in that, and she just came from Uppsala, from another conference. Right. And I need to say one thing about you. You're extremely generous with your intellect and with your time. And not many people are. So that I want to note. Okay, on that note.
You be generous with your intellect. So tell me.
There you go.
This is my book dedicated to Tigran on why public space matters. This is my first draft, a first outline. I want something positive, and I want something, do you feel, I don't know, do you feel like, yes, I want that? Does it make you feel expansive, or do you feel sort of it's not enough? Come on, tell me. I want to know.
I'll just open it up, yeah.
Hi, Julia Berge. I'm a master's student in the Urbanism Studies program here at KTH. Thank you. This was really illuminating, and I appreciate seeing both this kind of critical perspective as well as the positive. I think we don't talk enough about the positive.
I don't think we do either, but it's really hard to do. It's one of the hardest things I've ever written.
Yeah, I think.
No, I do. It's much easier to be critical. You all laugh, right? It's a lot easier being critical to say what we don't want than to say what we do want.
So my question for you is, do you see these as the positive side of public spaces as achievable through a variety of governance structures, or do you think certain governance structures lend themselves better? And then how do you balance that with kind of local custom? For example, sure, there are authoritarian regimes and that's not desirable, but is there still the ability for public space to achieve these things to some extent within an authoritarian regime or a democratic regime or a faux democratic regime?
It's a great question. I think that's just exactly that's a wonderful question. It's exactly the kind of question now that we need to start asking. Once we collectively kind of come up with some of the pieces that we want to work with, and there are other lists, other people have other lists, then I think we do try to begin to look at the governance structures. I have gone on record saying that I think some of the securitization, privatization, so let's call it neoliberal urbanism, doesn't allow a certain number of these things to happen for some people. So then we need to, it's a little more complicated. It in fact allows it to happen for a certain part of the middle class. I would say is pretty much able to have the access that I'm talking about to public space. But the very same structures, it was the talk I gave on vulnerability 2 days ago at Uppsala, and what I was arguing is that the vulnerability of the middle class is what I was saying. The way in which middle class Americans and Swedes, I put us all in Europeans, I'll put us together, fear others. What then happens in planning, governance, policing, surveillance? Are you all with me? Those very things that make that particular population feel safer, live in gated communities like I've worked on, or have highly privatized surveillance spaces, make other people exclude them and make it not possible to have any kind of social solidarity. So I think that's an important question, but I think we have to then begin to ask for what I don't do here, who gets this? Who gets to have this, under what conditions, and under what forms of governance? Which brings me to the authoritarian regimes. I mean, the biggest thing that has turned me upside down was I was supposed to go to Tehran to lecture. Both Saskia Sassen and I was in very good company, did not get visas. We were the two women. My husband got a visa, David Harvey got a visa, but we didn't get visas. And nobody went. The men did not go either in protest. But in my preparation for that, I did find that there are things I think there still are things you can do. You can get society to flourish in certain kinds of ways. But privatization, as I show you just one slide, but it's just a hint at, privatization maybe doesn't work the same way there. In some senses, privatization protects you in a way that it doesn't protect you, say, in New York City, or it protects different people. So this is a start of a quite nuanced and complicated conversation, and how I'm hoping this book will work is I will start with something simple, like it is simple, right? You all, it's pretty straightforward. Start with that, and then do just what you're talking about. Begin to ask questions of it. Begin to elaborate, and maybe have either some cases, or I'm not exactly sure, so that we could begin to address it. I mean, I see this as your work. This is my work. I've been critical. I've done my critical work. Now I'm doing my I see your work as working out under what kinds of governance structures. How much of this can be citizen-based? How much of this can be generated at the grassroots level? How much needs support from municipal government? And takes a lot of people. That. Another question?
Yeah, I.
Hi.
Yeah, hi. I'm Per-Mikael Sätström. I am a PhD student here at the architecture department.
Welcome.
So I'm studying.
Or welcome to me, I guess, to you.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
it's your place.
I'm sort of investigating this. How do you create plans to protect certain values of the public space? And so I'm very interested in the. First of all, I'm trying to situate in what you're saying from the American situation in Sweden, because here I think we have, in a way, we have access to public spaces, but they are inactivated for various reasons. So we have to reactivate, and we have to recreate a certain civil society, because we have lack of trust. That the more the trust is going down, so we really need to work with these spaces to recreate social competencies, I believe. So this is an interesting topic. And then, of course, that leads me to the notion of the common, which is in between sort of big government and complete privatization. And what do you think about the trends here to recreate the common as an economic unit in society, which I find very intriguing as a concept. So I don't know if you're following that debate much, or
well, I do follow that debate. I don't know that I'm expert enough to comment on that debate. I try. All right. One of the things I didn't say at the beginning, but I hope is clear, that everything that I've presented is evidence-based. That's one of the reasons it's presented the way it is I try to show you the research behind it. And the only research I've done on the commons has been on some of the co-ops that I've worked on. And I have spent at least 5 years collecting interviews from residents in co-ops. And I know that there are co-ops here and they're also in Denmark, and I've also read that literature. Even in a situation of the commons, a number of interesting problems with social relations do arise. So where I love this model of the commons, in the United States with private property regimes, which, that was just right, remember one of my problems, get in the way. But even if you took away the property regimes, there are social relational problems that do emerge. I think you're right about activating space. But I think, and I know that everyone's talk uses the term trust. I am less convinced, I'm an environmental psychologist as well as an anthropologist, that I think to instill trust is really a really big stretch. Do you know what I mean? It's a long ways away. I would prefer that we start with providing a sense of security or safety or something that's in between. This, again, why I go back to this encounter, creating moments of social interaction and encounter as a way maybe ultimately going to trust. But you're right, with no interaction between our citizens, our peoples, I don't see how we get there. That it's got to be something that happens through practice. At least that's where I've been going what I think comes out of this as a sort of meta idea is when all those people get together in Jones Beach in the ocean and they see everybody has families and their children are playing, or when they're in a religious ceremony up in the Welch, or simply walking across a walkway, or working on a mural in the street. There's a certain kind of praxis even, a certain kind of that does its kind of magic. So I think the thing that I don't know how to create trust, honestly, I don't. But I do think we can design and program spaces to create comings together of people in certain kinds of ways that can change the way they perceive one another and begin to build what I'm seeing here, the kind of flourishing society. Does that make right? And why do I say that? I've actually never been asked this question before. I've done a lot of research, everyone. I've 30, 40 years of research. And I'm just all on public spaces and some very, gated communities. And when I look across them and I look at what works and what doesn't, I think we have to take many steps. So I'm very strong on saying, yeah, we should all trust each other and be tolerant. Instead, I really want to say, let's think about smaller steps that we really can achieve and do one at a time, even in this dark time of Trumpism in my own country.
Hey, my name is Rosa. I'm a PhD student at the Center for the Future of Places with Tigran. Setha, we've known each other.
Yes.
And I know your critical work, and I'm delighted to see your more positive outlook.
You like it? Do you like it, really?
Very happy with your talk and your upcoming book. And so I won't have to explain any longer what the value is of public space, because I can just refer to your book. But I would like to respond to your question, what might be missing.
Yeah, please.
And I'm thinking in the category of privatization.
Let's go back to, you want to go back? Oops.
No, it's fine. It's all right.
Yeah, whatever I did was wrong anyhow.
Anyways, privatization, I think what might be missing from my perspective is the built form.
Right. Well, I think it's
Ground
missing from the whole
floors.
thing. Don't you think that the next step, no, I'm totally with you. The next step is to take this and try to start adding forms to it. I mean, I don't know what you think, Tigran, that I think that's what we have to do. I mean, how do these articulate with built form? Not just on the negative side, but even on the, what about on the positive side? Can you tell me a built
Definitely.
form that would produce informal economy?
I think small shops on the ground floor that create social relations between small entrepreneurs, frequent customers, but also newcomers, exploring some.
Okay, and I'll add to that. How about adding a, I don't know the word in English, veranda? Arcade, is that what you call it? How about an arcade like you have in Taipei, or you have in Barcelona, or you have Italy, but I was trying to go outside. You have it, or even in India, an overhang on the street, right? Arcade where you can have informal vendors, and even vendors, illegal, undocumented, whatever, vendors on the street. Because one of the things that happened at the World Urban Forum, I don't know if this will interest all of you or not, is someone from the World Bank got up and they were talking about how, the woman in Bangkok who fights for informal vendors. And the argument always is the shop owners don't want ambulatory vendors. Is that a term? Yes? Yeah, I don't know what term you use. Of all kinds, because they take business away. And I have 3 PhD dissertations and at least 4 articles that I sent her that show that in fact there is a synergy between the small shop entrepreneur, that they form relationships with the informal or ambulatory vendors outside, and even those that are not paying tax, whatever, on the street, because it increases the liveliness, it increases the trust and sense of security and safety, and they all help each other in very, very complicated ways, all the way from storing the vendor's thing in the shop during the day. So one little bit of public space, having the shop owners, an arcade or whatever you want to call, a sidewalk that can be used for work, and even city streets that can be filled with people selling things, that then becomes a very robust environment. And that is so contrary to what we're really taught in design school. So, I mean, I think that there are built forms inherent in this, but we need to start somewhere. I'm counting on you to do the informal economy part.
Thank you.
I had something to ask you, 2 things.
Okay.
And one I think was related when your colleague Sharon Zuckham was here.
Yeah?
She talked about streets and her latest book and so on. And one of my colleagues, Karen Bradley, made an interesting question, and I would like to complement that question with a further one. And that's about the external shopping centers. We have seen an explosion here in Sweden, of course, in many countries. And in
Latin America.
In Latin America. In the beginning, they went through child pains. They were not that good. But as every child matures, some become bad, some become good, some become ugly, some become whatever. The shopping centers adapted in a very good way. And as Karin pointed out, they offer now a whole bunch of different services, from childcare to how do you spend your time in a public room and so on. But what I've noticed also is now that they're being integrated into a more densified city-like environment in the suburbs.
Yeah.
So they're becoming a fulcrum of real urbanism.
No, I know.
But you have to accept it. They're not going to go away. So the key thing is, how do you make them real public spaces, or are they real public spaces?
Okay, I have a lot to say about that. But first of all, all our malls are dying in the United States. Okay? I give you 10 years before they will die. I can't give you all the reasons that they died in the United States, but they are dead. Michael, do you know? Do you know why all the malls died? Do you know the quick and easy? I don't know but nonetheless, in a country like the United States and Canada, where malls really took over everything, they are now out of business, empty behemoths that we don't know what to do with. Okay, those are, so don't get too excited. All right, that's on one hand. Two, I have learned, much to my chagrin, that indeed malls do functions for certain populations as very safe places, as definitely public space. Elderly can walk. There are places where they let the older people walk in very cold climates that they can go in and walk. There are lots of groups where they are designing in post offices and community centers. Depending on your laws, you can do protesting in public spaces or not. There are only 2 states, at least in the United States, that allow for free speech in a mall. One is in California, and the other is New York. New Jersey just turned it back down. I have a great talk, if you ever want, about the sort of legal issues of free speech in malls and why that has happened. If you agree with me that the most important thing about public space ultimately for a society is that there can be protest, which goes back to our authoritarian problem, or some kind of contestation or argument or something like that, you can't do that in a mall. And there are certain populations that nobody wants in a mall. And who do you think those are? Who do they not want in the mall? Well, they don't want poor people, definitely. How about homeless? But who else? Yes, teenagers. I don't like teenagers because what do the teenagers do? They come and they hang out and they smoke cigarettes and they don't buy anything and they can be seen as menacing to the others. So what I have to do is set up who wants to do the research? Let's go out to the suburban malls and ask an empirical question, which is, yeah, I think they are becoming the public space of the suburb. I don't disagree with you at all. But I think that it's really important that we go out empirically and look at what's going on, because then my question would be, who's not there? Who is it working for? Who is it working against? And what is the nature of free speech in that environment?
Yeah, exactly. Just to add that some of these malls are also developing public spaces outside. So, for example, Tebi Center now has a plaza which is integrated into a new housing area.
And how's it work?
Well,
have you seen it?
You can
Yeah?
discuss it from design perspective. It works. There's children, there's elderly, there's some homeless people there
Well,
too.
then I'm for
They're
it.
kind of spilling into in and out of the center.
That's good.
But doesn't mean that the center is great, but there's something happening. There is a better...
I think then I'm for it. I mean, I'm for any...
I'm not advocating this.
Yeah.
I'm just...
But here's, I think, this talk is really, I literally wrote it for you. So, you can have at it. But what's fun is to present something for the very first time and think, well, I can now use this, though, to go ask whether I think that's working or not. Is society flourishing? Is it productive? I think if we start asking ourselves, how is the public space productive? And it could be emotional. It could be trust, right? I mean, productive meaning trust, productive meaning entrepreneurs, productive. I think this helps us to have a conversation to answer your question in a more serious way.
And I had a second one, if I may,
Oh,
and then
yeah.
I'll give to the next colleague. Something on the language, because I think Per-Erik brought up the commons, and then we hear, depending on what literature you read, depending on what discipline you are in, if you ask our colleague and friend Peter Kaltorp, he'll say, please stop talking about spaces, talk about places.
I see, because
we
of
don't
the
recognize spaces because it's so ethereal, it's not
I see.
concrete. So
I
the
use
question is,
space.
urban commons, public realm, public spaces, public places, how do we make the distinction? How do we decide, do we keep one term, are we consistent, or do we just use indiscriminately everything?
Okay, I mean, I make rules for myself. But we can. I think that's a collective decision, Tigran, and I really agree. I use public space for the reason. You remember the slide in which public space, because space is something that we study and analyze, and I'm trying to make a large term, and I want to ask the questions of it. Is it virtual? Is it imaginary? Is it physical, material? So I can query the space part of that term. If I use place, it limits, right?
Very deterministic, yeah.
Do you see what I'm seeing? I use place in spatializing culture in that first chapter. I do something, and listen, you can argue with me, but to write a book, you have to like tell your reader, I'm going to do this or this. And for me, place is a culturally determined thing. Space is the much larger, for me, generic term. It's not for a lot of geographers who are phenomenologists. They see place, that of our dwelling, is primary, and space being something else. If you talk to David Harvey, David will tell you space is either abstract, relational, or relative, right? I mean, then he only uses space. Neil Smith, a sort of Marxist Don Mitchell, who I'm hoping you'll invite down to meet all of you, will only use space. They don't use place. Anthropologists do use place, but I use it when I mean something that is culturally embedded, given meaning, socially constructed, and space is a larger term. So I don't want to give up space because I don't want to give up yet the possibility of trying to go where you're going to go eventually, is that virtual space, internet space, all of that is all, the world is changing so fast. Space is not going to stay physical material. It's going to become very hybrid. Just like our smart city. I tried to talk about hybrid space. There are going to be all kinds of hybrid spaces. You start talking about place, you're parochializing it, narrowing it down too much, is what I think. I mean, you know, does that? Oh, sorry, but am I clear? Yeah, okay. And you can disagree with me. This is just my thinking, Jane.
Hi, my name is Jane. I'm a doctoral student and a colleague with Tigran and Rosa. So I have two questions. The first thing is my curiosity. Actually, I'm wondering if you have any case in your mind that, let's say, if we think public space from the weather perspective.
Weather?
Yeah. Yeah. So because all the cases you show, they are like a very, very nice weather. So we are outdoor, outside.
Right.
So, but here, you know, we are here in the north, like
I know.
many days dark and cold. So, what do you think? Like, what experience? Like, you know.
Well, there is a world of public spaces that I feel we aren't attending to and we should be doing research on. The most important one for me, at least in the United States, and I think in Europe, at least I know in the Netherlands, is the public library. Public library is a public space. Anybody can walk in there. The public library, I know in Utrecht, handles all the homeless who do for washing, showering, using the computer, helping them to find jobs. Teenagers who don't have a place to hang out go to the public libraries. Children in the winter, there is winter in New York. Children in the winter who don't have a parent who is home for them and don't have enough money to have after school care or anything, go to the library, and the librarian actually complains sometimes that she's become a babysitter. But if you could, it seems to me these same concepts could be applied to public libraries, what other kinds of public, some museums are truly public. What are some of our other public institutions that could and should be analyzed as part of our public space? I have had two students from China who work on northern climates, and I have actually seen models of in Taipei, where I have he's now a professor, but a student, he's still my student, who works in night markets. You're always my student. If you were once my student, you stay my student. But he worked on night markets, and they wanted to put the night markets inside. Night markets, do you all know, have some idea? Okay, all right. And actually putting them aside was pretty much killing them, even though it gets very cold and wintry. So, thinking about designs in which you can keep things outdoors, but provide shelter or from the rain, or provide pavilions or heat or other kinds of in-between, again, hybrid kinds of designs, rather than what's been done. There are a lot of cultures and a lot of places where they've taken markets and put them in these large high-rise buildings sometimes. They're not very effective, but would a large, how can I say it, a United States kind of market pavilion, which is a shed, Would that, imagine a large shred in which it's really open on the side and it's glass. I've seen those be very successful, and they can be public spaces. So I think your point is really well taken. I just don't have, I keep encouraging audiences to start looking at, in particular, public libraries, shed-like structures, markets. I've done a couple of markets, bus stations, train stations are all really important public spaces. There's a little bit of data here, a little bit there, but not near as much as we need.
My second question, maybe it's not a question, but I just think it's maybe it's worth mentioning. Do you think there is also a need for the society to talk about, discuss, or debate about what's public space, and maybe even have an education program, public education program about public space? I can tell you why I start to think that. I just visited China in April.
And where did you go?
And I went to Beijing, and yeah. So but my counterpart friends in Shanghai, and all of them are super busy. So what are you busy with? They say, oh, we have this full museum and art gallery programs. Our companies and organizations send us this brochure and encourage us to go. They say this is the new public space. It's a kind of like a trend, because suddenly they are regenerate the urban land. So they opened the West Bund and built a bunch of public and private gallery and museums, and they're all for free.
Wow.
So what's new is that those people work at this, let's say people who are 50s, 60s, they're even invited, and those people, they didn't understand that those were places they can go for public life.
Wow.
So I think the perception or understanding what is public space also needs to be more
broadened.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right, and I think your point is well taken. If we're going to do a book on this, I think I really need to be collecting more examples. The question is, it'll never get written at some point. It'll never get written because you can't put everything in. But I think the point is, what I know of China is that there are public spaces. Again, I have a graduate student who just finished dissertation on the public spaces in these large gated suburban communities where the grandparents are watching the children, and they have quite a rich social life, but it's the parents that are working that really don't experience or integrate in the rest of society, and that is seen as a problem. And maybe these cultural kinds of places where everyone could go together on the day they all have off, that could be good. I have grandchildren now, and I go to children's museums. I find that a really interesting public space. Some are very expensive, but if they were free, I could see that as very productive. Again, of the kinds of things that I'm talking about here, we could think much more broadly.
Hi, thank you very much for your great talk. I'm David, by the way, urbanism studies student. And what I found great to see and very interesting is that when we talk about public space, people usually think, oh, it's squares and streets, the city, but you showed also the beach and a lake out in nature where people go to on the weekends. So my question also in the context of you writing your book, do we make distinction between sort of urban public space and non-urban public space, or is your book going to be about both, or should
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think my mandate is urban, right? I think my mandate is urban. So, but for this talk, I thought some of the places, like Jones Beach, it's all urban people who go there. So does it count? They say that they couldn't live if they didn't have that place. Really, or Lake Welch. So I could get the same quotes though out of Prospect Park or Central Park. But I believe my mandate is to make it urban. I just wanted to I wanted you to think really broadly about the kinds of spaces that people are using and what they do to create a better society. And beaches and lakes and street corners and plazas, of course, and vacant lots and libraries and museums, all have the potential of doing it. But I think it's a good question. I think it's hard for me to think of not including maybe Lake Welch or Jones Beach because everybody goes there is urban. So the fact that it isn't urban, does that make it not urban public space? I don't know.
Maybe a good term is metropolitan public space.
Maybe, I don't know. But I think that's something we could talk about.
Green urban spaces.
Right. I mean, as I said, I could use Central Park and get some of those quotes. I mean, even though I have a lifetime of research, I have a limited, there's still only 16 or 17 parks that I've intensely studied. So also, if I want to give you quotes, then I'm going to use the sites that I've been interviewing in for a year or two. So if not, But I also can use the literature. Hi.
Hi, I'm actually a student, a PhD student in the School of Business School in Stockholm University, and I'm in marketing section.
Okay, I have my best friend is from there, so.
Yeah? Oh, okay. And what about the role of the emotions in public space? Because my PhD is in this area in São Paulo, which have been gentrified. And specifically, there's a place called Crackland there, which is it's a public space and it's framed as a disgusting place. So it's a space of disgust. And with our history with dictatorship, the streets now are public spaces of hope. Right. Or the carnival, it's a public space of love or fun. So how about emotions in the public space and the role of that?
It's really, I thought you didn't feel that my slides gave you a sense of the feeling, or is it just that I didn't call it out for you?
Yeah, no, it gave the sense of the feeling, but I think that's kind of also in the literature in general. As a PhD student, in consumption studies or place consumption or space, you always have this, the emotion and the affect or sentiments or
right.
It's always kind of there, but we never actually
talk about it.
Come to the fore.
Spatializing Culture, Chapter 6.
Okay.
Spatializing Culture, chapter is called Affect, Emotion, and Space. And it'll give you studies, and there's been a lot more. That's the easiest way to answer it. I'm very interested in affect. I think the literature on what's called affective atmosphere by Ben Anderson is some of the best, and Brian Matsumi, and there is literature. There are ethnographies that talk about it. It's true I didn't pull it out here, but it's certainly part of my other talks, which are, which are often about fear, and maybe there's some way to integrate it affect, language, social production, social construction, how embodied it is. Those are all, for me, methodological and theoretical tools that I use to build this. So maybe it would be useful to have a chapter about how I build or how I see these points. I'll have to think about it. Thank you for asking. That was good. I know exactly what you mean, and then there are these empty spaces, disgusting spaces, frightening spaces, all of these, and they are all public or spaces of trust or not trust. It's certainly something I could attend to, and I'm not sure how to integrate the sort of theoretical, which is to me a theoretical and methodological question, with the more practical planning side of what are we designing for. Right, and I think that's the difference between marketing and someone who's a planner here, who's going to be designing for. Thank you.
I just remembered something because everything you talked about here deals a little bit, not a little bit, quite a lot with spatial justice. And a few years back, we had Edward Soja, the late Edward Soja, came and discuss spatial justice because before his book was published in a very intimate atmosphere. And that's an interesting term that he and David Harvey pushed for, and yourself.
Right.
But we don't hear it often.
You don't hear it much. And I don't hear David talking a lot, using it as much. I would say, and I use social justice, but I'm thinking that you're really right. I wish I had my notebook. I need my little notebook to write some ideas. Just remember this. But that this, I think we should be using it more. I think it would be a really big help. And Soja's definition in the social justice, the spatial justice book is really helpful. And he argues for third spaces, which I do less. You do more, I do less, and maybe I'm coming around. I don't know. But that spatial justice for Soja, and I would say for you, Tigran, right, is often in that third space or in the common or in the in-between space. But yes, this very much is permeated with my interest in spatial justice, and maybe I need to be more overt about it.
Michael and I heard it last week when Peter Moskowitz talked about gentrification in New York, amongst other cities. There was a Philly, and then he brought spatial justice, and I was like, wow.
Did he?
I haven't heard that in
Did he
years.
use, and how did he use it? In what way did he use the term?
Michael?
This was at our conference last
placemaking?
week before last, actually. Now, and he gave an account of what had been happening in 4 different cities, and how what we really explored in the conference was the fact that social justice and the process of achieving social justice is beneficial for everybody economically as well as in other ways. So it really is a link to,
I'd like to see that,
it's everybody's self-interest ultimately. And what's happening with gentrification is actually,
Detrimental to all.
detrimental to all ultimately, yeah.
Well, what's interesting, Tigran, about what you're saying would it be, certainly would make me happy, but would it be more effective then to be talking about not just public space for all, but spatial justice? Public space is a space of spatial justice. In other words, that I've often talked about social justice and public space, but what if we try to integrate that as really our message, that it's the justice part that makes it so effective?
Maybe, especially for those of us that are architects, urban planners, and urban designers, so you would probably get this closer to form. Because at the end of the day, you showed good examples and they're bad examples. How do we translate this into form?
Right.
How do we build good public spaces? So that could be a really good term.
I think that's really helpful. I just hope somebody's either taking notes or...
Oh, we're filming this. So
I guess I'm on tape. Good.
You're on tape.
I'm also going to insert here that Peter Moskowitz's outstanding lecture is available on the Center for Future Places YouTube channel, so you can watch it.
Okay.
Cities for All.
Thank you. All right.
That comes a
That whole
subscription of
session,
$100 per month. No.
What?
That whole session.
No.
But I think this point also, Setha, that Cities for All, that public space is inherently about Cities for All in some sense.
Right.
If it's not public, if you're excluding people and you're saying, or some people are not welcome, then how is it public space ultimately? This goes to the idea of the urban commons, that it really is for all. That's how we get value out of it, is that everybody can come there, right?
But it's so easy for us to sit here and say this, and it is so difficult out there in the real world to convince people of the necessity that all should be there, and that social justice and accompanied by spatial justice will create a more flourishing society, I use the word flourishing in the new way that flourishing is being used, which means economically flourishing, socially. That's why I chose that term rather than thriving. Or I thought about that carefully. Why is it so difficult to convince the world, the leaders of the world? First, I think we need to convince them that public space is important, but why it's important ultimately is the social justice component. I think that's what comes out of my talk, that the whole thing is that it's the social justice element and the spatial justice element from a design point of view that will make for a flourishing society. It's not just because there's public space, it's because of what it can do for all of us. Okay.
One quick follow-up, which is this idea of justice.
Introduce yourself.
Justice is something that we have to struggle with, right? People act in their own self-interest in the short term, and they cause harm to other people. They cause harm to our collective. They cause harm to our urban commons. So we have to struggle to not only achieve justice, but convince other people why it's important. That's why you're writing the book, right?
Okay.
Okay, I'm Sverre Bekkes. I'm a PhD fellow in Oslo, and we talked shortly about this yesterday. I just wonder whether your typology actually consists of two typologies.
Okay.
The one consisting of positive beneficial aspects of public space, and then another typology consisting of actual uses, actual activities taking place in public space, which
Yeah. How and could we put it together? Yeah, that's what you're working on is.
Yeah.
And I sat and thought about it last night. You know that he's working on a typology of activities in public space, and it captures more than my. I told you it captured more than my flourishing society, but the goals are different. The question is there some way to put these into conversation? And already I want to change this, but that's me. I mean, you know, if there were better diagrams, I could have at least had 5 different groups or 6. There just aren't. But I mean, to look at the use, maybe there's 3 diagrams, you know, and then there's the whole ecology of it, where really all of this has an ecological element to it. So there's a lot of work still to be done.
and then maybe also typology, which integrates that typology and the other one, the negative aspects of public space.
Oh, that I'd
a
like,
more
yeah.
exhaustive typology of public space.
Yeah.
Maybe.
All the things that can go wrong. That's what I love to do. I actually like doing the negative better than the positive. It was harder doing the positive.
But you have typologies, but Matthew Carbone has done typology.
Has he?
Yeah.
And what does,
Quite a lot.
and,
But they're very much UK, London.
okay, you know those typologies.
We have one.
I'm interested in conflicts in public space, and
Good.
I think we should be much more tolerant to conflicts.
Yes.
Because I think we're parceling the society to dissolve conflicts, and then people are very isolated in their little apartments. And I've tried my experiment in my own neighborhood to facilitate this kind of citizen dialogues
Yeah.
on the Facebook, you know, and people are so angry. And I think it's very important quality in public space that you can actually socialize and you can learn good manners. You can learn to communicate with other people when you're going into these spaces, because you have to confront them. And so I'm thinking about how can we get there, because we need some tools for facilitating these meetings.
Conflict. I totally.
Because I'm afraid they don't happen spontaneously, but maybe it's of course we can supply certain protection for climate, and we can have some catalysts, and then people maybe they will catch up, but the tendency now is towards total atomization.
No.
And this is a big challenge, because people also want some kind of community, but then they go to the gentrified area where everybody is like themselves, and that's actually not helping them. They don't,
Okay.
because then people, I mean, you have these extreme neighborhoods where nobody lives there actually, because they are so rich there, so they're just taking their jet plane somewhere else. And so I'm just intrigued by this situation in society now. So I think we need these tools for
conflict.
facilitating conflicts and making people accept that there are differences.
I agree. You should read On the Plaza, which is, I mean, I almost used to always start that public space is where conflict can happen in a safe forum. I just chose the social interaction because I think it's a lot, because ultimately that's what we're talking about, bringing people into contact with one another, and I felt it was more universal. But there's more to that, though, than meets the eyes. My research on co-ops and condominiums and on private governance, I studied gated communities, and I thought really it was all about the walls and the gates and the guards and the going in and out and the fear that it was the affective dimension and the talk. And after about 8 years of research, I also realized that the form of governance in gated communities, which is a homeowners association, the corporatization of the organization of domestic life, at least in the United States. And there are these same, I actually know that these same structures in a different form occur here in Sweden, because I have a friend who is a developer, that it's actually partly the governance that is making this happen, that you go to a board, or you go to the police, or you go somewhere else with your conflict, you never directly come into contact anymore with your neighbor. And that one of the things that's particularly characteristic of suburbs and middle-class behavior across the world is this dislike of being in conflict and constantly looking for governance structures that will handle it for you. So back to your question about governance structures, I think governance structures are part and parcel of the sort of spatial justice question, simply because so many people really want to avoid coming into contact, and in particular in conflict with others, and yet that is the basis by which we develop trust and a sense of, as you say, community. So I think your question is a great way to end, is how can, and maybe I'll put conflict back in there rather than contestation and resistance, put conflict, or put both. I don't know what I'll do. But I will watch this film so that I remember all these wonderful ideas, and want to thank you so much for being incredible audience. I mean, with incredible ideas, and please email me if you have other ideas. Really, this has been a wonderful experience, and thank you so much.